Good morning, everybody. Today is a historic day, a historic moment, a golden moment of witnessing the Sri Ram Pran Pratishtha ceremony and inauguration of the Ram Temple, Ayodhya. All the Indians, not only in India but world over, are engrossed and engaged in this landmark religious and spiritual experience. On this occasion, Maharshi Karve Stri Shikshan Sanstha's Dr. B.N. College of Architecture, in collaboration with INTAC, that's Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, Pune chapter, has organized this public lecture on sacred landscapes of Ayodhya. We have with us today Professor Amita Sinha from USA. I'll briefly introduce you Amita Sinha. Amita Sinha is a former professor of landscape architecture and South Asian studies at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, USA. She has taught at the Indian Institute of Technology at Kharagpur and Gandhinagar in India as well. We are glad that she is here at Bnca and we are working together on an international studio on Vrindavan, India. She is an expert on sacred landscapes and has worked extensively on Ayodhya, Varanasi, Govardhan, Vrindavan, Shantiniketan, Taj Mahal, etc. So, welcome Amita Sinha, and on to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Shubhada, for this introduction. I'm so happy to be here and witnessing, this grand, momentous event of Pran Pratishtha happening today. My research on Ayodhya goes back a couple of decades ago. I became very interested in how Valmiki's Ramayana portrayed nature in the mid-90s. And then I went on to compare the images of Ramayana, Valmiki's Ramayana, with the landscape of Ayodhya, and further compared it with other pilgrim towns of northern India. I guess in 2018 was when Professor Shubhda Kamlapurkar organized a design workshop in Ayodhya. Was the first time I actually was there looking at various sacred sites on the ground, and since then I have written a number of papers on Ayodhya's landscape. So today what I want to do is to take you to Ayodhya in history, briefly describe the background to this contested site, Ram Janam Bhoomi, and its resolution, and also then talk about sacred sites of Ayodhya, especially the southern part of Ayodhya, which is full of water bodies and which need to be preserved. So Ayodhya is just beginning to develop, as you know, and massive amounts of funds have found their way. There's infrastructure development going on at a scale unimaginable. In fact, Professor Kamlapurkar and I were just talking a few minutes ago about the sea of difference between 2018 when we were there and today. So there's been a total transformation, and this transformation is going to go on given the amount of political will and public enthusiasm for making Ayodhya the place it deserves to be. So scholars such as Hans Backer tell us that Ayodhya, as we know, evolved only in the last 800 to 1,000 years as a result of imprinting of myths on its landscape. I beg to differ. I think the history of Ayodhya goes back a much, much longer period of time, and it is the place legends that have preserved for posterity the collective memory of Ayodhya as Ram Nagri, Ram's capital. However, it was during medieval India that there was a rise of Bhakti movement, and that led to large-scale pilgrimage. The writing of Mahatmyas, Ayodhya Mahatmya, was written in the 12th and 13th century. Before that, during the Buddhist period, Ayodhya was known as Saket. And when we look at the history of Ayodhya, we see that it was lost and reclaimed time and again. The story of being lost to memory and being reclaimed is an ever recurring theme in Ayodhya's history. And how does reclamation happen? It happens because the hillocks, the water bodies, the Saryu riverfront is the primary receptacle of Ram's story, Ram Katha. So Ayodhya, as you see in this pilgrim map, was a peninsular region, and now the Saryu river bed has shifted. The ancient fort of Ramkot, where Ram Janambhoomi is located, is actually on higher ground. So water is a key element in the urban structure of Ayodhya. The sacred waters of Saryu, when surrounding the town on three sides, lowland basins in the floodplain, and the inland ponds indicate a way of seeing nature as a medium of divine manifestation. So there are many stories linked to these water bodies, to Saryu, and of course to the hillocks also. Myths preserve collective memory in the tradition of Ayodhya being lost and reclaimed time and again. When did the first loss occur? It was Ram's earthly departure, along with citizens of Ayodhya, which caused the first abandonment until his son Kush comes back to restore the city. And this is narrated by the 5th century poet Kalidas in his epic Sanskrit poem Raghuvamsa. And then there was Vikramaditya, king of Ujjain, who rebuilt the city again with 360 temples around 2000 years ago, presumably following another period of dereliction. The myth of loss and retrieval becomes a historical fact when Gupta kings in the 5th century reclaim Ayodhya by shifting their capital from Patliputra to Saket. So Saket is a flourishing market town, and it was at the junction of north-south and east-west trade routes. It was well known to Buddhists and Jains during the Mauryan period, and there are stories of Buddha and Mahavir having meditated in the gardens of Saket. Saket enters the period of pages of history as Ayodhya, so it begins to be known again as Ayodhya when the Gupta kings become devotees of Vishnu, and the Gupta kings built temples in their new capital, Ayodhya, and they issued copper coins in which Skand Gupta assumed the title of Vikramaditya. Now Ramkot, the area which has been covered by the ancient fortress of Ram, was first excavated in 1969-70 and in 1975-76, and it showed the presence of black polished ware. Now this indicates that the urban settlement dates back to at least 6th or 5th century BCE. ASI excavations in 2003 revealed 7 strata, the earliest going back to 1st millennium BCE. So we have evidence of stone and brick construction during the Shunga period, that is 2nd and 1st century BC. During the Koshan period, 1st to 3rd century CE, we see terracotta figurines and copper coins with Garuda image and Chandragupta legend from the 4th period of the Guptas, that is 4th to 6th century. Then the fifth period, 7 to 8, is indicated by a brick circular shrine with a water chute. During the 6th, that is 11th to 12th century, we find a huge wall 50 meters long. And the 7th period, 12th to 16th century, by another massive structure, 50 meters by 30 meters, likely a pillared hall or two halls with 50 pillar bases in 17 rows. And it was on this pillared hall that Babri Masjid was constructed in 1528 on Mughal Emperor Babur's orders. So Chandradev, the first Gadwal king, visited Ayodhya as a pilgrim in 1093. He bathed in the Swargdwar Tirth in the river Saryu, and this is mentioned in copper plates. In a stone inscription that was part of the Babri Masjid wall is recorded the building of Vishnu Hari temple in Ayodhya by Meghsooth, who was a vassal of Govind Chandra, the Gadwal ruler, the son of Chandradev. Was the capital of Guptas, that it was the capital of Gadwas, and that Ram Janambhumi had been venerated for a very, very long time, as attested by the archaeological artifacts discovered in 2003. Then what happens after the Gadwal period? Ayodhya becomes the target of Islamic iconoclasm. This begins with Salar Masood's invasion in 1034. The invasions kept on happening. Then Muhammad Ghori comes in 1198. And we see Ayodhya being part of the Islamic Sultanate by 1226. It was ruled by Sharkis. Jaunpur is not very far from here. And then by the Lodhis from Delhi from 1479 to 1526, at which point Babur comes and gets a masjid built. But the Hindus did not give up. The presence of Ram Chabutra and Sita Rasoi in the outer courtyard of Babri Masjid in the travelers' accounts and the late 19th century attested to Hindu attempts to reclaim Ram Janambhumi. And this intensified in the mid-19th century as soon as the rule of the Shia Nawabs in Lucknow ended and East India Company takes over after the First War of Independence. So, from 1860 onwards, only intermittent prayers could be offered in the masjid. One of the domes of Babri Masjid was damaged by Hindu ascetics in 1934, and as we know, that in December 23rd, 1949, a group of devotees broke into the mosque and placed the Rama deity below the main dome. So the worship has been going on since 1949. On 6 December 1992, 150,000 people gathered in Ayodhya, and 150 Karsevaks destroyed Babri Masjid with mattocks, axes and rods. 2,000 lives were lost in communal riots across the country. Now, why is this place so important, Ram Janambhumi? The place of Ram's birth is a site of hierophany, a manifestation, a revelation of the sacred. And this is where Vishnu takes avatar in the Treta Yuga. The sacred energy of the site is embodied in the deity. That is a living entity with the ritual of Pran Pratishta, to be worshipped with reverence and devotion. So in other words, the place is the deity is the place. has not only great powers but is also a juridical entity as recognized by Indian courts since colonial times. The deity Ram Lala is considered to be a minor whose interests can be represented in lawsuits over the contested site. And that's exactly what happened. Supreme Court in 2019 recognized the claim of the place deity and said, Ram Lala Virajman. So the temple is designed in the Gurjara Chalukya, or broadly the Nagara style of architecture, by the Somphara family of architects based in Ahmedabad, according to the traditional canon of Vastu Shastra. We have seen the edifice today, truly impressive, 5 mandaps, and the Sanctum Sanctorum built over what is believed to be the exact spot of Ram's birth. So that is what is important, the exact spot of Ram's birth. That is the reason why the temple is there, had been there and is going to be there. The mosque, on the other hand, is a place of worship of the community of faithful. A mosque can be built anywhere. The only requirement is that it faces Mecca. There is really no relationship of the mosque to the site. In this case, of course, Babri Masjid was built as a sign, a symbol of conquest. Now that temple has been built, we have to understand that it is not a stand-alone. It is embedded within the cluster of many sacred sites in Ayodhya. So what the images we see is of a grand monumental complex, as befitting the stature of Ram, the divine hero and king. A number of maps have been landscape plans or site plans have been floating around, and I am very critical of them because I believe that they are not really taking account the sacred features of the site in a comprehensive way. And I will explain more on that. But first, about the deity. The child deity worshipped at Ram Janambhoomi is one among Ram's many forms, each associated with a place. Of the plethora of images in verbal and visual text, 3 are ubiquitous, celebrating the roles Ram played on earth. He was a king, a warrior, and a renunciate. In the Ram Darbar, he is the king of Ayodhya, presiding over the court with his wife Sita, his brothers and Hanuman in attendance. Ram is visualized in a warrior pose, holding a bow, a slayer of foes, a conqueror of demons, including Ravan, the powerful king of Lanka, who had abducted Sita and held her captive in his island fortress. So the king and warrior images establish Ram as a sovereign ruler and a powerful world conqueror. But there is yet another iconic image of Ram, Tapasvi Raja, renunciate king, who acted selflessly, made tyag, renunciation, a supreme virtue, and had extraordinary control over his emotions. And this renunciate persona was shaped by his education in the ashram of his guru Vashisht and his sojourn in wilderness with the sage Vishwamitra to protect the Brahmin ascetics from demons. And then later, in the 14 years of his exile with Sita and Lakshman. So this is the archetypal hero's journey, beginning and ending at Ayodhya, but the journey takes place largely in the forest, thus linking the city of his birth with the larger territory beyond. So what is Ram Raj? A utopian state, never to be realized, but always to be aspired to, where everyone is happy, healthy, and prosperous, over whom Ram rules as a just and compassionate king. Everyone follows their own dharma. Ram is Maryada Purushottam, supreme among men, whose behavior epitomized honor and righteousness. But he's incomplete. He's incomplete without Sita. There's no Ram without Sita. Sita is his Shakti, the primal energy. So while Ayodhya may be the seat of Ram Raj, captured in the iconic image of Ram Darbar, but the forest is the setting where his warrior and renunciate personas are fully developed. Now there is a saying in Hindi, जब राम वन गए, तभी राम बन गए. He became Ram when he went to the forest. In facing wild beasts and conquering demons in the wanderings through the wilderness, and in practicing an austere way of life in forest hermitages, Ram's growth into a tapasvi Raja, one who combines in himself the traits of warrior king and ascetic renouncer, that is evident. Of the many place images associated with Ram's life, none are more important than the landscapes of his exile that were formative in his becoming who he was. So what were these landscapes of exile? I say they are archetypal. Aranya, the wilderness, one, the forest, which are depicted in rich imagery in Valmiki's Ramayana and the retellings in other languages and in pictorial representations. And it's these landscapes that are integral to the story in communicating Ram's thought and feelings and as a setting for his actions that result in the self-discovery of his own divinity. So there is a episode in Valmiki narrates after Ravan is killed and all the gods come to congratulate Ram. Ram asks, "Who am I?" I'm Dashrath's son. And Brahma tells him, "No, you are God himself. You are Vishnu's incarnate." So, Valmiki's Ramayana has told us about ancient Indian attitudes towards nature with many facets. One is the transformation of the chaotic Aranya into the pastoral Tapovan. Tapovan is a forest of asceticism, which is significant in the story of Ram, Sita, and Lakshman's exile. And then there is Pramodvan, a landscape of eternal springtime, inspiring Shringar and Virheras. There is Vatika, a smaller version of Ram, usually attached to a temple or a palace. Ramayana describes Dandakaranya, named after the demon Dandak, as the abode of demons, ghosts and goblins. And it was the kingdom of Danda laid to waste because of sage Shukracharya's curse. Today is identified with the Bastar district in Chhattisgarh. And this painting depicts the demoness Taraka being killed by Ram and Lakshman in Tarak 1. The dense trackless Aranya was transformed into the open pastoral landscape of Tapovan through the presence of sages. And Tapovan here in these paintings is represented as an island of sanctity where sages practiced austerities in ashrams built on riverbanks and in forest clearings, and they purified the wilderness of its evil through their sheer moral force. And Tapovan is characterized by the absence of violence and amity between beasts and humans, where tiger and cattle roam together. It's a place of spiritual force, and it is also a sanctuary. Pramodvan, on the other hand, is a veritable paradise of eternal springtime, where nature is at its most fecund, inspiring eros. The valley landscapes of Chitrakoot and Panchvati, where Ram and Sita lived happily during the exile, and riverfront groves in Ayodhya depict Pramodvan. The natural diversity of the tropical deciduous ecosystem, as captured in Valmiki's descriptions of the lush natural scenery, with water as a central feature. Valmiki's Ramayana mentions as many as 200 plant species and a large variety of animals and birds, indicative of the poet's familiarity with the native flora and fauna of the region. How he knew about peninsular India, I don't know. Aranyakand, the book of the forest, describes pearl-like waters of the river Mandakini with its flower-strewn banks, swaying trees on the hill, garlands of flowers. The lyrical beauty of Chitrakoot enchants Ram and brings great happiness to Sita as she and Ram grow closer together in nature's bosom. So in this very beautiful painting, you see the tapasvis bathing in Mandakini. You see Ram, Sita and Lakshman in front of their kuti. You see Ram adorning Sita with flowers. Also the episode of Indra's son pecking at Sita's breast, and then Ram's arrow following him to the end of the world. The urban culture of ancient India incorporated features of picturesque river valleys in gardens. Vatika is an enclosed garden modeled after the one, but these medieval paintings actually show the Islamic Charbagh influence. But what distinguishes these Vatikas from the Indo-Islamic garden is the presence of shrine. Sita and Ram first meet, as you know, in a garden in Janakpuri. Sita had come to worship at goddess Gauri's shrine, and Ram and Lakshman had come to pick flowers. It was love at first sight. Sita sits in Ashokvan in Ravan's captivity. This is a garden grove of Ashok trees, and Sita is grieving, remembering Ram, and the tree is a protecting abode in her anguish. Nature shares in a mood of viraha. So, back to Ayodhya. As Ram cult grew in medieval India and Ayodhya became a pilgrim center, we see the stories now part of the pilgrim guides, the Mahatmyas. And at Ram Janam Bhumi are also sites which tell us about Ram's exile. So the gateways of the historic fort are represented today by mounds to the east, southeast and southwest of Ram Janam Bhumi. Here is Ram Janam Bhumi. But these mounds were named after the monkey warriors who had helped Ram in his quest to trace Sita and bring her back after killing Ravan. So Ram brings them back to Ayodhya for guarding his fort. And so we have Kuber Tila, and there is now a Jatayu statue apparently built. There's also Nalnil Tila, which I did not see in the plans floating around. Nalnil, who had built the bridge to Lanka. There is Angad Tila as well. Again, no mention of Angad Tila in the plans which are out on the internet. There is Sugriv Tila, which is west of the site. Now, Kuber Tila, named after Kuber, the god of wealth, was actually occupied by a Buddhist stupa during the Gupta period. And there was also the public hanging of two freedom fighters after the First War of Independence. So these tilas within Ram Janam Bhoomi, the place toponymy connects with Ram's exile. And there may have been other earlier place deities here, we don't know. But as of now, the warriors are the symbolic guardians of Ramkot. And then there is Sita Rasoi and the Sita Koop on the north, which represent the power of Sita, the earth goddess, who transforms raw into edible food. She, a symbol of plenitude, is the source of bounties of Ram Rajya, and Ram is incomplete without her. He, the dark sky god, is complemented with the fair earth goddess, and together they rule the earthly kingdom of Ayodhya, exemplary in their love and devotion to each other and in their faithful adherence to the royal code of Dharma. So, Ram Janam Bhoomi and the land acquired, nearly 70 acres, are not a standalone. What we see around Ram Janam Bhoomi is a dense urban settlement of narrow winding streets leading to temples with courtyards. It's a very human scale of Ayodhya's core that contributes to the sense of place, and it's very important that new interventions do not destroy this scale. Now, Hanuman Tila, named after Hanuman to the east of the site, is actually an 18th century temple. By some accounts, the most visited shrine in Ayodhya. Although in a survey we did in 2018 and 19, Professor Shubhda Kamlapurkar and I, we asked nearly 80 people what is the most important place in Ayodhya, and they said Ram Janam Bhoomi, unhesitating. The second was Hanuman Tila. And I think many Western scholars have missed the boat, when they wrote about Ayodhya following 1992 demolition of Babri Masjid. Diana Eck, the Harvard historian, whose book India's Sacred Geography is a very important book and is widely read. She describes her visit to Ayodhya, and she says people don't even know about Kanak Mahal, or they don't know about Ram Janam Bhoomi. All they come is for Hanuman Tila. So I think she had missed out on something really important there. So, what is Ram Janam Bhoomi going to be like in the next 5 years once the master plan is implemented? Whatever it may be, it needs to be sustainable. And sustainable design entails that the landscape perform at 3 levels. It performs symbolically, commemorating Ram Janam Bhoomi. It performs at the ritual, as a ritual space, and it also performs as an ecological design. Of course, a new ecology is coming up, but this really needs to be based upon the idea of all the sites of Ramayana distilled across the subcontinent, distilled into one place. So when Sita Rasoi and Sita Koop, Kuber, Nalnil, Angatila, and there are many wells here. I was fortunate enough to get the survey map, which was put out by the Ram Janambhoomi Tirth Kshetra for a brief period on their website in 2020. There are trees and there are existing wells. I think these are memory traces of an earlier time. These memory traces will be preserved, and they need to be augmented in gardens and groves and water bodies, which are reminiscent of places in Ramayana. Among the cultural practices that are fundamental to sacred site, experience of sacred sites, it's the circumambulation, the parikrama of sacred foci, that is an essential aspect of pilgrimage. We found that pilgrims circumambulate Ayodhya. They follow the footsteps of Ram, Sita, and Lakshman when they left for their exiles, so they go all around. And then they also circumambulate around Ramkot. And then they circumambulate around Ram Janambhoomi. So the pilgrim circulation is really a series of embedded circumambulatory paths. And this is what has to be really kept in mind when planning. A series of embedded circular loops around the entire site and around the specific landscape features. So, if this landscape is going to be a constructed ecosystem, and sustainability is a key to the success, needs to be inspired by the Tapovan ashram, which practiced an austere way of life dependent upon the forest for food resources, building materials, and daily necessities of life. And this ancient ideal can be adapted for promoting sustainable practices such as local food production and creating waste to energy cycle. I think the site does have a sewage treatment plan, and it also has, I think, a water treatment plan. But believe me, water management is the key to the sustainability of any landscape. They claim that 70% of the master plan of Ram Janambhoomi will be covered with greenery, but it remains to be seen how much of this greenery is in the form of groves and how much is, just like ground cover, tree, lawns which gobble up pesticides and water. The Tapovan, the Pramodvan, the Vatika, these are the landscapes that Valmiki's Ramayana described. And these are also the landscape that you find in pilgrim sites. And this language can be reinterpreted for designing an allegorical landscape. And I am going to take you through what I think will be a way of including this landscape typology from textual and visual representations, as well as historic and vernacular precedents. So in other words, what we really need is a narrative landscape, a Ramkatha landscape. If devotees enter from the main street connecting to the railway station, or they can enter from Hanuman Gadi, which is on this side, and they're taken on trails, because it's a large site, to the many settings of Ramkatha. There's Pushpapatika, supplying flowers and tulsi leaves. Ayodhya receives most of its rainfall in June, July, August, and September, and much of this can be harvested in underground water tanks that replenish the existing tanks and wells. A large pond built in the low-lying, this is the lowest part of the site, southwestern part of the site, can be integrated with an open-air amphitheater for performances and festivals. And this can be a major catchment and retention facility for surface runoff and rainwater from rooftops, collected and conveyed through a gravity-fed network, and filtered and recycled for use. Furthermore, kunds constructed at the base of Kuber, Angad, and Nal Nil Tilas will collect runoff, recharge groundwater table, cool the microclimate. The annual Ram Leela can be held in the large Maidan, whereas festivals such as Ram Navami can be celebrated in Rangshala, the open-air amphitheatre. A Nakshatra Vatika, a mandal form, which we see in the Nakshatra Garden in fact, locally here in CSIR, National Chemical Laboratory in Pune, can be in access with we actually have a north-south axis here. Trees mentioned in Ayurvedic texts and associated with nakshatras that govern human life can be planted here. And a Bhojanshala north of Sita Rasoi. Its courtyard designed as an Ashok Vatika, planted in 9 square mandal patterns defined by pathways and chabutras at their intersection. So, blow-ups of Angad Nalnil Tilas and Pampa Lake, Nakshatra Vatika, Ashok Vatika, inspired by the gardens of Orcha. So, memory traces and spatial practices are generative tools in designing Ram Janambhoomi as a narrative landscape with temple as a monumental core. Embedded within a network of sacred sites and the cultural landscape as part of the wider imagined landscape of Ramayana, characterized by polycentricity through spatial transposition and duplication. The larger landscape of Ram's life, including his formative years in the forest and his exile period, would be distilled in these within Ram Janambhoomi. I want to take some time also to talk about other parts of Ayodhya. The key feature, as I have pointed out before, is water here, the primordial element in Hinduism of divine instantiation. So we see all kinds of water bodies, kunds, Sar, Sarovar, holy river Saryu, river Tilodaki, all deemed essential for ritual purifications. They shaped the evolving urban structure. It was the presence of water, the essence of life, that made Ayodhya's geography in a sentient landscape, eminent with divine energy, within a worldview in which folk deities, the Yakshas, the Nagas, the Bhairavs, the Puranic gods and goddesses, inhabited the waters, the terrain, and vegetation. Now, Kalidas describes Ayodhya in Raghuvamsa, and it's similarly described in Arthashastra and Sukraniti as a city filled with public parks, calls them Nagarupvan, and royal gardens, Pramodvan. And where were these gardens? They were on the outskirts of the city. They were below hillocks in the midst of orchards along a river. So there is a certain area, this area in the southern part of Ayodhya, which is the Kshetra is demarcated by the Parikrama path. And here we find the jewel mountain, Mani Parvat, south of Ramkot. I hope that these kunds now are getting more attention. In fact, when I was there last year, some of these kunds did indeed get a facelift. But Mani Parvat, a very interesting case study in the tension between myth and history, protected by Archaeological Survey of India since 1920 for its antiquity. It's also a place of Hindu worship and festivities. The mound was the site of archaeological excavations by Alexander Cunningham in 1862-63, and he found remains of Buddhist stupas and a monastery. So the site occupation again went back to early Mauryan period. Emperor Ashok added a brick-lined stupa to the earlier earthen mound, which was again renovated during Gupta period. And Buddhist legends claim that Buddha meditated here in the Kala Aramak Park. So today the remains of the Buddhist stupa are preserved, including the brick column that surmounted it, but the devotees' attention is focused on the deities in the temple. And who are these deities? Well, there is Ram, Sita and Lakshman, but there's also the mountain worshipped as Mani Bhagwan. Now this landscape is Sita's maternal home. She comes, this is again place legends, local legends. She comes to swing and enjoy the soft monsoon breeze. So what happens now that Ram and Sita deities from temples all over Ayodhya are brought here and placed in swings during the 12-day Jhula festival, celebrated at the arrival of monsoons every year, and is attended, believe it or not, by 200,000 devotees. And Mani Parvat and its surroundings are a heritage precinct, both place legends as well as history. And what we see here today is a landscape in which culture and ecology are intertwined. So as I mentioned earlier, that Ayodhya is depicted as being encircled by a tree belt of gardens and orchards, but few trees remain today in the largely agricultural tract. So uncontrolled urbanization poses the greatest challenge to the heritage precinct and the functioning of the landscape as a constructed ecosystem. So here you see Mani Parvat as with a dense tree cover, but the large forests that would have once surrounded the water bodies, only a remnant banyan grove survives. And housing colonies, of course, are mushrooming along transportation corridors, the railway line, National Highway 28. That the divine feminine is eminent in the waters is indicated by Bnca Pune, located close by, where an aspect of the great goddess of Shakta tradition is worshipped during the festival of Navratri. On the banks of Bnca Pune, sage Vashisht is believed to have taught Ram the 14 branches of knowledge. The nearby Agni Kund is located south of Yagnavedi, where Ram performed sacrifices in a forest setting. Ashok Vatika in the vicinity of Agni Kund appears to be a vestigial remnant of fabled garden groves that once surrounded Ayodhya. It is described as a pleasure garden in Ayodhya Mahatmya as a place where Ram and Sita sport. So Ashok Vatika would have been part of Pramod 1 described in the epic. And other texts as a veritable paradise of eternal springtime where nature is at its most fecund, inspiring Shringar Ras on the banks of Saryu and Tilodaki. Another facet of nature is highlighted in the legend associated with Vidya Kund, Tapovan, where sages practice austerities. And this landscape therefore speaks of dual aspects of nature, the forest for withdrawal from the pleasures of the city, life to cultivate knowledge and wisdom, and a natural garden for sensual pleasure. Then there is Sita Kund in the waters of the Kund, named after 500 meters east of the hillock. And here a birthday, Janki Navami, is celebrated with great gusto. So as you can see in these photographs, the kunds are brick masonry structures, and with the exception of Ganesh Kund, have steps in 2 or 3 sides leading down to water from brick platforms around the edges. Agni Kund is the most elaborately designed, with a subterranean brick arched colonnade and likely built in the late 19th, early 20th century. So temples and shrines were built on the banks of Vidya, Agni and Sita Kund, while Ganesh Kund lies in the vicinity of a graveyard, a Shia mosque and a graveyard. So this heritage precinct is also an ecosystem, constructed ecosystem, in which the unobstructed flow of water, its collection during monsoons, retention in the dry season, was central to the functioning of the landscape. And there was an elaborate system of water collection, conveyance, and distribution, which evolved and was maintained for centuries, enabling place legends to flourish. This is what made it into a mnemonic landscape. Collective memories were reproduced in traditions, engaging the devotee with a jewel mountain and in the water bodies around the grove, surrounding it. So, as Ayodhya expands and residential encroachment around these kunds increases, it's important that we keep in mind that we need to regenerate. As we've built the grand temple of Ram Janambhoomi, Ayodhya also deserves no less. Its landscape needs to be regenerated, and the beginning is, I think, the restoration of kunds. Here, we find a lot of problems, flooding and Tilodaki, the stream which disappears underground. It can be daylighted. Trees can be planted along the major roadways. So this is an example of regenerative urbanism planning through restoration and augmentation of water systems and greenways. This would allow the degraded landscape to recover as a healthy ecosystem using natural processes, and also enhance cultural values and practices linked with water groves and the Jewel Mountain. So the restored kunds and vatikas could be very attractive destinations for devotees to imaginatively experience the landscape where Ram and Sita sported, and the ashram site of Ram and his brothers' education in the forest. This blue-green network will not only regenerate the degraded ecosystem, but also revitalize the community ethos about sacred waters, Tapovan, Pramodvan, anchoring collective memories of Ram Katha on the rejuvenated cultural landscape. This can also be a multi-faith landscape, a place where ancient Buddhist stupa exist, a place of Shia worship. And let us not forget that this area is only part of this larger system of waterways and reservoirs and of parks and other open spaces that had once existed around Ayodhya. And these planning efforts can draw inspiration from a long history of viewing nature as sentient and building with natural processes, not against them. So, in conclusion, I'd like to say that transcendence of God is made eminent in the world of Hinduism. The life story of Ram is that of a hero's journey through life, separation from and return to society in his exile, many rites of passages, many trials and tribulations. For Ram, the self-actualization of divinity within comes upon his conquest of Ravan. And Ram, known as Maryada Purushottam, the man with failings, also a divine hero who epitomized ethical conduct for the last 2 millennium of kings to follow in India. Bhakti tradition, as it developed in the last 1,000 years, stresses a personal relationship to God, and is facilitated by the felt presence of divine in this world. So, places associated with Ram's life are sites of lived experience, and they're associated with specific legends in his life and hold the possibility of encounter with the holy. The government of India, in its Swadesh Darshan scheme, is planning a Ramayana circuit to promote religious tourism. 10 out of 28 states in India are covered by this circuit, and it's extended to neighboring countries of Nepal and Sri Lanka as well, indicating the breadth of Ram's stories grounded in cities, forests, hills, and riverbanks of the Indian subcontinent. Ayodhya and other sites of Ramayana can be planned as relative landscapes around these kunds, groves, and hills. So, be glad to have your comments and questions, please. I guess Ayodhya is going to be a place to visit. Everyone is curious. If you have not already seen Ayodhya, I was there in January of 2023, and likely be back again. um, I would like to acknowledge presence of Professor Kiran Shinde, who is editing, along with Professor Joseph Shear, a very interesting volume on religious tourism. And he was kind enough to include Shubda and I study on pilgrim perceptions. And in these interviews, we found the feelings people had about Ayodhya and Ram Janambhoomi, and they ascribed everything to divine origins. Saryu, as Guru Vasishtha brought her to this earth. They talked about Ayodhya as a dham. They drew maps in which Ram Janambhoomi is the very center of Ayodhya, seen as a fish in the waters of the Saryu. They expressed pain. This was 2018 and 19. They expressed pain. We are living in houses, and Ramlala is under chappar. So it was very moving to record these very poignant feelings about Ayodhya and Ram Janambhoomi and Ramlala. Thank you, Amita. Okay. Yes.